I imagine few people expected this to turn up in English. An obscure redirect page on the Sponichi newspaper website detailing the results of their own investigation into what their journalist and Asanoyama did. It reads rather like a tragic tale of two very lost souls, which highlights the dangers of journalists overly befriending their sources, even if both parties' intentions are good. The unnamed 44-year-old journalist, now fired, became pally with Asanoyama on the autumn 2019 tour and exchanged regular texts with him thereafter. The two men began eating out together, the ozeki covering the costlier meals, the journalist the cheaper ones, and the taxi fares. The journalist admits to having viewed the ozeki as an invaluable sumo contact during the pandemic when in-person interviews were largely banned. Between March 2020 and March 2021, despite pandemic restrictions, the two men went to the Kagurazaka-based hostess bar around 15 times, usually just after tournaments. Then, in April 2021, assuming their previous figures are correct, they seemed to up the tempo, visiting the bar some 5 times and twice in just 3 nights. On the 28th and 30th of that month, Asanoyama took a taxi to the journalist's house to pick him up, then took him to the bar after 9 p.m, therefore at least 60 minutes after unenforceable state of emergency closing times. The journalist invokes the hazy memory defense a lot, but believes Asanoyama paid. And we are talking hundreds and hundreds of dollars a throw here. Then came May the 7th, 34 hours before the tournament, when the two agreed to meet outside the Kagurazaka bar at 10:30 p.m, but were photographed from a minivan when Asanoyama's taxi arrived. The angry journalist approached the van and threatened the occupants, who he correctly believed to be tabloid employees. He then foolishly returned to Asanoyama's taxi and told the driver to head to another club in upmarket Nishiazabu, to where they were, of course, tailed. There, from around 11 p.m. to at least 2 a.m, the two men drank with 2 female acquaintances. When the journalist saw Asanoyama out to the taxi, the two men were snapped again. Most astonishing is the absurd fashion in which the men then tried to protect each other. They spent the next few days exchanging now deleted texts on an elaborate cover story. When challenged, the journalist would say that they linked up at Kagurazaka specifically to travel to the Nishiazabu bar, whose owner would, that very night, introduce Asanoyama to a friend of his, a physiotherapist, who would treat him on the premises. Despite that idiotic plot, that is the story the journalist gave to the tabloid writer who accosted him on May the 18th, and instructed Asanoyama to defend 2 hours later. He then mailed the same untruths to his boss, who relayed them to the tabloid writer asking his office for comment. The next day, even after the tabloid story broke, the journalist repeated the lies under further questioning from his bosses. Only that evening, when Asanoyama mailed to say, "I'm so sorry, the game's up," did the journalist finally crack and confess. Thus ends the story of a sumo bromance gone horribly wrong. Two evidently needy men, so keen to please each other as to lose all sense of pandemic perspective. Or at least, what sense remained after their bosses belittled the pandemic.